our society, we don't talk about death. We use words like past, the polite way of saying somebody died. We don't say died. We don't say dead. We don't talk about grief. Grief is sad. Grief is also our experience of life. Grief is really a beautiful thing if you embrace it.
Welcome back to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, everybody. I am your host, Randy Sparks, and today we've got a wonderful guest named Robin Weeks, who is a former caregiver and has a business coaching caregivers called My Pivotal Point, which you can find at mypivotalpoint.com. And it'll be linked in the descriptions to this podcast as well, where she coaches all types of caregivers, primarily focusing on caregivers of aging parents, but it's not limited to that. And we had a conversation the other day, and there were so many nuggets of goodness in that, which I believe will rise to the surface in this conversation. So I was so excited to begin with this. Robin, welcome to the conversation.
Randy, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you today about this.
Okay, Robin, we had a beautiful conversation a week or two ago, and I learned a few things about you. And one, you call your business My Pivotal Point. What's the significance of that name?
It actually started, I am a leadership coach and trainer and have been for over 20 years. And I also coach a lot of individuals through career changes, particularly people in midlife to, coming towards a, kind of a high point or coming off a big career and ready, hey, I've always had this dream and I'm 55 years old. And so I was sitting with one of those clients one day and I said, I've just started my own company and I'm having a hard time finding a name. And she looked at me and she said, why don't you call it Pivotal Point? Because that's what you help people do, is find their pivotal point. So that name was already taken as a .com. So I added the My Pivotal Point to it, which to me seemed rather appropriate because it is someone's pivotal point. And when I started my caregiving business, I didn't want to start another company name, I wanted to keep my current name because I wanted to add caregiving services into my leadership work because that's where I was meeting a lot of caregivers. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, caregiving is a pivotal point for most people. You don't expect it. You're all of a sudden you're there and it's a pivotal point in your life in so many different ways. And so I just added the tagline caring for caregivers onto a company name I already had incorporated. So for me, there is meaning behind the name and I already had it. So that's where it came from.
Okay, well, that makes perfect sense and seems extremely appropriate. And you've got, I mean, you mentioned it already that you have this long background, a couple decades in leadership training. And so, but you've also pivoted yourself, right? These pivotal points. And so where your path has taken you from this corporate leadership into caregiving and then providing this sanctuary for others, I guess virtually, because you provide virtual coaching for people doing that. So how would you describe maybe a common thread that kind of goes through all of these paths in your life? Hey there, everyone. Did you know that beyond hosting the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, I am also an estate planning attorney, and I love gratitude, and my law firm is proud to sponsor this video. Since 2010, in my law practice, I have designed and delivered customized peace of mind with sophisticated estate planning made easy. So whether you need foundational estate planning, including revocable trusts, wills, powers of attorney, and healthcare directives, which is what most people need, or you might need advanced strategies such as irrevocable trust for asset protection or advanced estate tax planning, I am here to guide you every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, your peace of mind is my peace of mind. You can visit randallsparks.com and I can get started helping you plan for the future today. Now back to our podcast.
Yeah, well, I do believe that we all have common threads throughout our life. And I also believe that I think at the heart of our nature often we are explorers as human beings. And I believe that we need to honor that within us that wants to explore new avenues in our life. I've explored a lot of different ones throughout my life. I've had other careers in other fields. But to your question about the common thread, there's been a common thread through just about everything I've done. And for me, that common thread has been educating or before I became a coach, it was really informally coaching people, supporting people, helping people find their paths, or finding something that's inside of them that they didn't know was there and accessing that. And it's shown up in my work in a lot of different ways. It shows up in my leadership training and coaching through showing I've worked with a lot of executives, but the last several years, I've primarily worked with new managers, and it's shown up there through helping them access what they really wanna believe about themselves as becoming leaders within their companies. It's shown up in my caregiving work as helping caregivers see that what they're doing has a lot of meaning and purpose, and that they can just as well as be a caregiver, they can still have their life. Because I didn't for the first 3 years of my over 6 years of caregiving, I really didn't I tried to keep my life, but I wasn't too successful at it. So, I think my common threads and it's what people tell me. It's what I hear from the people I work with that they say, "You're so good at what you do because you really care about what you do." I think at heart, I'm an empath, and I feel deeply what other people emanate and tell me, and and I wanna be there to support whatever it is they want from life, through coaching or in caregiving to support them in that role, to help that role be something that's meaningful to them, and providing them with the support and the resources and the education that can keep them from going down some of the more stressful paths that I went down.
Okay, so stressful paths that you went down. I think there's a lot underneath that, Robin.
Yeah.
Um, so, it, when we talk about this common thread that goes through all of it, you've had a varied career, but this thread um, connects it all. I mean, the one thing that's consistent through all of that is Robin, right? And you bring you into everything that you're doing, which I think is one of the wonderful things in life is that this adventure that we're on, as you described. Um, and you mentioned to me before that you never expected to be the caregiver for your mother in her 90s. Can you talk about how that transition came upon you and what that was like? Because I think that will be interesting to people listening who are either caregivers or who this may be thrust upon or who were once caregivers. I mean, all of us are maybe surprised by something that comes upon us as you were.
Yeah, it's funny, I was thinking about this a little bit this morning, I was reading some articles, and there's been a lot of talk in this field of supporting caregivers and educating caregivers, and it's really kind of exploded in the last probably 4 or 5 years, and there's been a lot of talk as to why caregivers are so quiet, and why they stay behind the scenes, why don't they talk about what they're doing? And I personally have come to the conclusion that I think a lot of it is because it's a familial duty. It's a familial obligation, like raising kids. You do it because you're family. And it's just part of what you do to care for your family when they need you. And so you don't go about sharing those stories with everybody. You don't go about saying, "Hey, I'm a caregiver." And so what happened to me was my father had become terminally ill and had a diagnosis of 6 months to live. And he was 87 at the time, and he had to go into nursing care. And I started going but they lived a state away, so I started traveling every month. My older brother lived nearby, so he was able to do a lot for the 2 of them. However, he was also ill. However, he kept the degree of that illness, from me and my other younger brothers. So we knew he was sick, but we didn't know how sick he was. And so I would go down once or twice a month to relieve him of some of those responsibilities because at this point, my dad was in nursing care and skilled care, and We had moved my mother out of their home in their retirement community because it was too much for her, so we moved her into one of the apartment residences in that same community, and she was just, she and my father have been married for 67 years. You can imagine what that does to somebody, to watch them dying in front of you, and so my father died, and 5 days before that, my older brother had died, and that that made me a caregiver. I didn't know it at the time. I was oblivious to the term even at the time. All I knew was that my mother needed me. My older brother was gone. My younger brothers lived several states away, and I could get there in about a 4-hour drive. So I started going once or twice a month to check on her and stay with her and so forth. And eventually convinced her to move to assisted living closer to me because I couldn't sustain the travel and running my running my business. So I bring her here. I move her into an assisted living apartment. She's 30 minutes from my home, and I bring her out to my home every weekend, and she's healthy. She's in good shape. And one day the administrator at her residence, I had a very good relationship with this gentleman. He was an amazing person, and he says to me, he says, "You're one of the best caregivers we have here." I looked at him, I said, what do you mean? What are you talking about?" He says, "You're caring for your mother. You're her caregiver." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm just helping her. I'm just making sure she's okay." He said, "You're caregiving, Robin. This is what caregiving is." And I went home and I had to Google the word, like, what? I didn't know that's
You
what I was.
didn't even know what it meant.
No. I'm like, I didn't know that's what I was doing. I'm just looking after my mom. And I think that's what happens to so many people when they fall into it is they're just looking after a parent or a spouse or an adult child who needs them, They don't think of themselves as a caregiver right then and there. There is a very good definition of caregiver, and as most definitions, it can be distorted or expanded or shortened or whatever, but it basically means that you start doing certain things. You might start doing the driving, as I did for my mother. You might start doing their grocery shopping for them. You might be stopping, if they're still living independently, stopping by their home more often and helping them around the house. But it's the little sort of daily living activities that you start helping them with or doing for them that that then increase over time as this is apparent as they're aging and need more. But it's those little activities of daily living, which is a term you learn when you become a caregiver, that you start picking up and they start increasing, and that's caregiving. I have a friend actually here who was caring for her mother as well. And her mother was independent. She had her own little apartment in a retirement community here, the same one where my mother was in assisted living. And her mother was 100 years old. And she would bring her mother out to her house. She like me lived out in the country. We're both horsewomen and we have horses, so we live out. And but she would bring her mother out to her house for 4 days for every week. And she did the driving, she took her mother to doctor's appointments, she cooked for her mother, she did her grocery shopping for her mother, and her mother, at 100 years old, was a pretty amazing woman. She was in great health, she was, I mean, amazing. And I said to her one day, I said, "You're your mother's caregiver." She said, "Oh, no, I'm not her caregiver. My mother's very independent." I said, "Yeah, but you do this, and you do this, and you do that, and that's caregiving." She didn't wanna admit that's what she was doing, and I think in her eyes, and I've come to some difference of opinions around this myself recently. However, in her eyes, she saw the fact that her mother still had an apartment, although she only spent 3 days a week there. Although she didn't drive, although she didn't go to the grocery store, her daughter did that. Her daughter was doing a lot of things for her. But she saw that just that small level of independence that her mother still had that prevented her, the daughter, being the caregiver. I think in her eyes, in her mind, she related that term to someone who was frail and needed a lot more help. So, yeah, I think I've strayed off of your question here. However, I think the point was, how did I fall into the role? And I didn't expect it. My parents were in their 80s, they were in great health, they were socially active, they were physically active, and when they moved into this retirement community, which is what we call a continuing care retirement community, where you have the different levels of living from independent homes all the way to memory care and nursing care. So everything was there. And I was under what I currently call the delusion of care. They were fine. Didn't worry about them. I went to visit 2 or 3 times a year. If they were sick or had a hospital stay, I'd make an extra visit. And other than that, they were great. They were so doing so well. And then my dad gets sick and dies, and then my brother dies, and the whole world just crumbled. Everything fell apart, and, there I was. So that's how unexpected it was to me, and I think for a lot of people, when you fall under what I call that delusion of care, delusion of health, everything's okay. Why should I worry about them? That's when it happens, and that's when plunk, there you are.
Oh, and you found yourself there, and how long did you care for your mother after that?
Well, if I add the 6 months plus a year, 18 months before I actually had her moved her here to nearby me, almost 7 years. And the
And
statistic.
how did that
Go ahead.
yeah, um yeah, and you can explain, what the statistics are for care. I think that's where you're going. That what the progression of that timeline was for you from you going from maybe a small amount of care in your mind, accepting what was once a delusion, and on to where this was maybe more full time, or what was that progression like?
Yeah. So, as I said, she was in good health. She had no cognitive impairment, and she was great. She was doing really well physically and mentally. Other than being in what I now have come to know as what we call complicated grief because of, her son dying and her husband dying. And she was just of that generation where you don't talk about that, you don't process it. You just take it. And that was really, really hard for me to watch her be like that. And so I move her here and I bring her home out to my home on the weekends, and we have a good time out here. We're able to go on little outings and adventures together, and and we had a good time. We really were having a good time. And then here's it's I think it's kind of a typical progression. So much at this point she was 88, 89, I think, when I moved her here. Has a fall. Okay, so my first ER visit. Holy crap! My mother's in the ER. Drop everything and run. I'm panic stricken. Um, and that worked out okay. And then there's a hospital stay. And so I'm spending 3 or 4 days in the hospital with her. And that was my first time for that. And then everything's fine. Then she goes to rehab for a few days, to get stronger to go back to her apartment. Okay. And then those things start to gradually increase. Not that it's every month or everything like that, but going from maybe 1 in 6 months to 2 in a year or 3 ER visits in a year, that sort of thing. So that those sorts of episodes start to increase a little bit. And then I think also because she was just so horribly sad, and she wouldn't always show it, but I could see it. And she just didn't really wanna try so much anymore. This was a woman that went from in her retirement community where she lived before I moved her here, going to water exercise classes at their community building 3 times a week and driving her own car to moving here, and I couldn't get her to go do it. And she went from walking with a cane because she refused to do anything differently. It was bad enough to get her to use cane to finally, she had to move to walking with one of those rolling walkers, I think they call them rollators or something. And she was stubborn about that too, and all these things are just decreasing independence, decreasing dependency. and frailty. And so I watched this arc go from here to just kind of slowly coming down. And at the 3-year point, she had another hospice, very serious hospital stay. She went to rehab, and I was told by the administrator of her assisted living building where she had a small bedroom apartment, she has to meet certain physical qualifications to continue to live here because it's considered independent living. She couldn't pass the test. So we had to move her to, they had a second level of assisted living, which was moving from an apartment to a bedroom. It's like a dorm room, you know? Which
Yeah.
meant more of her stuff went away, which meant her physical world got smaller, but she would get more care. So she would have round the clock nursing care instead of a nurse on staff 24 hours a day who could put a Band-Aid on something, you know? It's a little different in assisted living. The qualifications that she couldn't meet forced her to have to move to this other level of care. And that for me was devastating. And right before that, I had brought her out to my house one weekend. She loved it here. And she was walking down the hallway to the bedroom and she turned around and she looked at me and she said, "You know, Robin, I don't think I'm gonna be able to stay out here anymore on the weekends." That just broke my heart. Those weekends weren't easy for me because, if I heard her get up at night, I was afraid she was gonna fall, and, it was just a lot of constant attention on her. But I loved having her here. But she knew her physical abilities were declining. And then the move to the higher level of care. And the funniest thing about that, Randy, was that I couldn't sleep for 2 nights because I just knew I was gonna have to tell her she couldn't go back to that apartment. She had a cat, and she wasn't gonna be able to keep the cat. We were gonna have to give it away. And I was talking to the administrator of the, apartment residence, and he said "There's no need for you to be the bad guy. I'll tell her. Let me be the bad guy in this." And this is so typical of my mother. We sat there in that she was in the rehab room, and I just, I said, "Mama, we need to talk to you about something." And he sat down and he told her, and she looked at me and she said, "I didn't ask to get this old. It's okay."
You didn't expect that response?
No, no, not at all. So she moved into a bedroom, and she couldn't come out here anymore. And I could still get her out of the building every now and then, although by this point, she was beginning to rely on a wheelchair. She was not as willing to use the rolling walker. That was her choice. She was physically able to walk. She just didn't want to. She was like 92 at this point, you know? Um, so yeah, then I couldn't get her out of the building anymore, because she just wasn't physically strong enough to, get in and out of the car and that sort of stuff. And, that was hard because my mother, when someone lives in one of these residences, that's their whole world every day. And if you can't get them outside of that building, can you imagine? I mean, that's like being in a prison to some degree. So the best I could do for her was take her out in the gardens. They had beautiful gardens, and I would pick up lunch and we go sit out in the uh, pagoda or pavilion, whatever it was, in the gardens and have lunch together. Because that's the best. And sometimes I would just take her out of the building completely, and they had beautiful campus. I just roll her around in her wheelchair. We just go for these strolls everywhere. But that was another point, in the downhill phase of that arc. And then there was another hospital stay and another stay in rehab. And I had to spring her from rehab because she was so depressed. I said, "Get her out of here. Let her go back to her room." So they did. But I had to go in front of all the administration to get this special permission to spring her from rehab. And then she just, she was mentally still good. She was very forgetful. Pardon me. She was 92, 93 years old at this point. And then in September of 2018, she had a hemorrhagic stroke. And she'd had some mini strokes before, but they really just caused more just confusion than anything else. It was what they diagnosed as vascular dementia, which can cause some confusion. It was very mild. But when she had the hemorrhagic stroke, it took away everything but her mind. She couldn't feed herself. She couldn't get herself out of the bed. She couldn't get it at this point. Before that, she could get herself in and out of the bed into the wheel. She could do what we call transfers, from her bed to her wheelchair, a wheelchair to her chair where she liked to read, and stuff like that. But after that, she couldn't do anything. And they had to get a lift to pick her up from the bed and put her into the wheelchair and then bathe her, you know. And her mind was still there, completely aware of everything was going on. And my mother was one feisty woman, okay? Her entire life. This woman, she did things that were far ahead of her time. She was just a feisty woman. And I would go by every day. And her words, she couldn't get her words out. They were garbled. Occasionally she could, and I was so frustrated. I'd say, "You can do this. Come on. I'm listening. Come on." And she'd get frustrated and she wouldn't talk. And I'd go by every day, try to get her to eat some lunch, and she would look at me with this mad look on her face, like, "Arr," And they they advised I put her in hospice care, so I did. And that just really added another layer of care. So I didn't have to have her moved to nursing care, which is probably where she would have ended up if I hadn't advocated for her. And I wanted her to stay there because all the nursing assistants and the nurse, everybody knew her. She'd been there at that point in that level of care for 2.5 years, and she had friends there. They loved my mother because she was so feisty and she was witty, and they loved her. And this killed all of them to see her like this. And so I got a call, it was in January, into January in 2018 from the hospice nurse saying, "You should get on down here. Things are changing." And yeah, at that point, she had gone into pretty much, she was just non-responsive at that point. She had apparently, I didn't really know this, she pretty much quit eating like a week or 2 before then. I think her choice. I don't blame her, you know? And, so I sat with her for 4 days while she died. And I wasn't there the moment she died, but I sat with her while she went through that process, and I'm glad I did. It was, oh, God, you're gonna make me cry. Um, she had a good death, she went out on her terms, and, um, yeah, that was the arc of my caregiving journey with her, and I'm so glad I did it.
Okay, so you say, "I'm so glad I did it," and then there's something deep in this that I see coming from multiple different angles that I think may surprise people. You've talked to me about it a little bit, but it's something I think about, is grief and what where grief is coming from and what you may be grieving through this process, because there's multiple things happening. Where I think the obvious one is grief for your lost parent
Yeah.
and processing the grief of loss. But what other types of grief are experienced through this process? And what have you learned from it? And how can you help people prepare or process it?
The other types of grief that I went through, and I see other caregivers go through this as well, and I was not aware I was grieving. It's really what's termed anticipatory grief. And with a parent or a spouse, someone you love dearly like this, when you watch this decline, you start grieving who you're losing. People who care for someone with dementia, they call it the long goodbye. because you're watching this individual just decline like this and you're losing that person. And with my mother, because of her age and frailty and watching her not want to engage as much at certain points because she was grieving so deeply. I was grieving that. I was grieving the mother I knew. And every now and then she'd surface. Oh my gosh, when she surfaced. She she like I said, she's pretty witty and kind of acerbic at times, and she would introduce me occasionally because she was kind of pissed off at me for making some of her decisions, which I tried to partner with her on, but at one point I just had to step in, and she would sometimes introduce me. She'd say, "Oh, this is my mother, my daughter," which was like a stab. Yeah, so when that part of her would surface, even though she was digging at me, I would kind of rejoice in it. Okay, there she is. She's still in there, you know? But I did grieve what I was losing in her. And then I grieved when she decided to just take that wheelchair on. She didn't have to. She could still walk. She made that choice that she didn't want to try that. And that was grieving. And of course, I mean, the obvious grieving of her death. And then the final part of the grief for me was the loss of my role as being her caregiver. I I was I was like a boat in the water without an oar.
So this is a concept that tell me if I'm wrong, I imagine surprises people the most,
Yeah.
where someone may say, well, it's expected that I'm going to grieve the loss of someone,
Mhm.
but maybe not as expected that the loss of being the caregiver, because maybe this idea of what is my identity and purpose
Mhm.
now that I've spent all this time being a caregiver, and so much of my purpose and identity was devoted to that person, and now that they're gone, all of a sudden there's an emptiness and a vacuum of, well, all my energy and attention has been spent on this, and so now what? Does that surprise people? Did it surprise you? And I think there's other aspects in life that we can observe this phenomenon.
Yeah, it totally surprises me, Randy. My mother would say to me all the time, first of all, she'd say, "I hope you're getting your work done. You spend a lot of time with me. I hope you're getting your work done." And I always assure her, "Yes, mom, I'm getting my work done." However, during the last 3 years, because she needed so much more, I did cut back. I cut back my client load, and my income was reduced by about 30% over those years. So it was I didn't tell her. I didn't want her to know. But there was that. And then she used to always say to me, "What are you going to do with all your time when I'm gone?" And I would laugh. I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" You know? However, what happened was that January, come the middle of the month, she died or that February, she died the January 30th. I'm sitting in my house in a cold gray winter day in February, and I'm looking at my calendar on my computer and it's empty. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? I have nothing on my calendar. I have no one to go see. My mother's gone, so I don't have that anymore. I don't have any appointments. What's going on with that? And it hit me. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh my gosh, I'm just floating out here. I never felt so unmoored in my life as I did that February day. Completely unmoored. And that year was really hard for me. Really hard. I lost my caregiving role and it meant a lot to me to care for her. I lost a lot of purpose in my life when that role was gone. I lost my mother, which 94 when she died was not unexpected, but you lose a parent. I don't care how old you are, and I don't care what your relationship with that parent has been. It's hard. My father was already dead. My older brother was dead, and now my mother was gone. And that can set you feeling unmoored as well in the world. You have people in your life that anchor you to this planet. Your parents are those people. Your siblings are those people. And when they're not in your life anymore, I think our I think grief to me is traumatic because even though I sat there with my mother for 4 days watching her die, and I sat with her after she died and talked to her after she had already died. My mind accepted all of that cognitively, intellectually, but emotionally, she was there one day and gone the next. And that's a trauma. It's a trauma to our psyche, it's a trauma to our body. And the loss of all of that at once with all of a sudden, I'm not driving by her assisted living residence anymore. And I can't tell you how many times I would drive by and start to pull in. I'm like, oh, I don't need to go there anymore. Just all the little things in my daily life that were part of caring for her were just usurped from me in one fell swoop. And it was incredibly hard realization to accept that that was no longer there. And it made me feel really, really awful, really awful. I got really depressed, and that year was just really hard because I just quite frankly didn't quite know what to do with myself for a long time. I mean, I pulled it together, obviously, but
So you have a new relationship with grief
yeah,
that you've gained through this process
yeah,
and grieving many different things, a loss of a previous version of yourself,
yeah.
a loss of a parent, another parent, a brother, um, a loss of an identity as a caregiver. So you've had to grieve so many of these things. Um, I, I mean, on one hand, not making light of it, but you're becoming an expert grief processor. Um, but so many, like, we all experience some type of grief. Like,
Mhm,
we're experiencing that through our life, and if we're open and able to give ourselves the the presence and space to allow that to emotionally process,
mhm.
then we can come through on the other side and adopt the next role. Um, so I'm curious how you coach and teach people on about grief, about grieving, about identity, because I think this goes far beyond losing a loved one. But I imagine the the stay-at-home mother who's raised her 5 kids all since, babies all the way up until college and marriage and sends them off, and then suddenly she's home alone when they're gone, and now this identity that, this mother lived for 20 plus years, 20, 30 years of mom, and now the empty nest. Maybe there's a sense of grieving, well, I'm not that anymore. Like, now what's my identity? Fill in the blank. What whoever's listening are you experiencing that creates this um transition and maybe grieving of a prior thing? I'm very curious about how you teach people to process that, but also to find meaning and purpose when maybe something that meaning and purpose was attached to is no longer there.
Okay, wow. Um, yeah, so I did go through a training to become a grief facilitator after all this, as well as my uh, caregiver training. And I have come to believe that in our society, we don't talk about death. We use words like past, which I think is a polite way of saying somebody died. And I want to say, where do they pass to? They just pass by your time. It's a silly word. We don't say died. We don't say dead. And we don't talk about grief. Grief is sad. And grief is also our experience of life. Grief is really a beautiful thing if you embrace it. It's hard, it's very difficult. As you just pointed out, I experienced numerous types of grief at various points in the last several years, and each one was different. And because we don't really process grief very well in this country, yes, you can go hospice care will offer you some bereavement counseling after a death, and that lasts about 3 or 4 weeks, and then, yeah, you're supposed to be done with it. You're supposed to grieve and then get over it, and actually, someone said that to me one time. They invited me out, and I said, "I'm just not quite ready because after my father and brother died, I pretty much secluded myself." And, this person says, "Well, when you get over it, call me, we'll go out." I mean, people say horrible things to you when you're grieving. "Oh, look at the bright side. They're in a better place. At least you had all that time with them." I mean, all the most diminishing things that people say because they don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to say, "What do you need? Do you wanna go for a walk? We don't have to talk. Let's just go for a walk." People don't know how to do any of those things about grief. It's very, very uncomfortable for people that aren't grieving to be around someone that is. And I tell people that are grieving, let yourself experience this. It's a companion and it's going to be with you probably the rest of your life in some form or another. I mean, you watch me, look me, I'm still tear up when I talk about my mother sometimes, and that's grief showing its face. And I am embracing it because it still means my mother comes up inside of me and it still makes me feel what I felt for my mother. And if I didn't have that feeling, it would be gone. And so early in when grief, when it's relatively new, things can overwhelm you. You can be in the grocery store and pick up a piece of fruit that reminds you of this person that died and burst into tears. Or somebody can walk up to you and say, "How are you doing?" All of a sudden, the tears come pouring out of your eyes, and you have to turn around and walk away. And grief is it's very powerful. It's a very, very powerful experience. And by not allowing that experience to surface in your body and your mind and how you're experiencing life at that point in time, it will come back to haunt you later. It will. I didn't grieve my older brother. I was very angry at him for many years, and I did not grieve him because I was so angry at him for dying. And I finally did reach out to a therapist for some support in that and was able to begin to process that grief. But it was almost 6 years. I just stayed angry at him. That's not healthy. And I think what I really try to tell people when they're going through grief is it's okay. Grief affects your whole body. It can make you sick. It can make you nauseous. It can give you diarrhea. It can give you headaches. It can make you want to shut the world out and hide under the covers. It can make you laugh giddily sometimes because you remember something about that person that just makes you start laughing out loud. Grief is very bizarre and it's different for everybody. And what I really try to help people with is to understand that it's your experience, just like caregiving. It's your experience how you grieve, but don't shut it out of your life because it's a companion. And when you have a companion that walks a path with you, you need to bring that the companion along because they know things that you don't know. And grief is
Ooh,
one of them.
I love that. That idea that grief is a companion and bring it with you, don't hide it and block it away. This is a theme that's come up recently on the podcast is people talking about going through these terrible, different, difficult challenges. I had a guest recently named, I've probably already even talked about this with someone on the podcast. Her name was Megan Fate Marshman, and she wrote a book called Relaxed. But in the book, she talks a lot about losing her husband, and she's young, very young. They were married 10 years and she lost her husband. But early in the book, she says this quote. I'd like to get your thoughts, and maybe I'll chime in with some of my insights. But she says, "I don't want to miss the gifts of this season of pain.
Mm,
Grief is the shadow of everything beautiful,
mm,
and we can't avoid pain or grief or emotions in life.
mhm,
And all these emotions are for us,
mm.
right? Even the hard ones." And my sister also lost her husband when he was young. And I learned something really amazing from her because she was processing her grief in her way and accepting it. And I watched her go through, the just the devastating sadness and anger and just being pissed off at him for leaving her. And then that resurfaces from time to time, even still years later, where she may see something that needs to be fixed and he was so handy. And then she's like, I can't believe he left me because he would have fixed this. Um, but but now it comes out as a reflection of love. I think all of it really is a reflection of love. But I remember hearing her say something that when people would approach her and talk about it, she would also need to accept where they are in their grieving process of this because we're all processing it at a different rate in a different way. It's an individual grief process. And so, where she lost a spouse, I lost a brother in law. Our relationship was different. I am a different person. The way I process that grief is different from hers. And there's some beauty in the acceptance and of each other's manner of processing that.
Mhm.
And I've found myself getting frustrated with, I can't believe someone would say something like that, and so on. But so often I've realized it's because I want them to do it my way.
Mhm.
I want them to grieve my way, the way I am right now, and empathize with me. And I realize, oh, that's what I want.
Yeah.
But they're going through their process their way. And that's what you mentioned, something that this is individual.
Yeah.
We all need to process grief our way. But the key is to allow it to process
Yeah.
instead of block it out and avoid it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because and there's because we don't talk about grief, it's like I said earlier, it's I think we you're expected to get over it. Companies give you what? A week of bereavement, time, What's a week? What's a week? Grief
Yeah, not even close to enough
Yeah,
to
grief
to
has
process
no
that.
timeline. There is no timeline for grief, and because everyone processes it, some people feel like, "Well, I'm not supposed to be happy anymore. I should be sad all the time." What if somebody sees me out having a good time a month after my husband died or whatever, whoever died? So what? That's what you need. You need to go out, have a good time, and laugh. You need to experience that side of life again because it's still there for you. And I do tell people when they start crying, and I do this myself, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying, I'm sorry." Don't apologize for the tears because you know what? Those tears are just the love of that person coming out of your body.
Okay, so with our last few minutes here,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear. I've heard you say that this journey of caregiving we've gone through. I mean, there's so many emotional moments and opportunities for learning and struggle and grieving all throughout it. But you say this journey of caregiving is amazing.
Yeah.
So I would like to know, why is it so amazing with all these difficult emotional and physical and time consuming challenges? Why is it amazing? And where do you find joy and gratitude through it?
It's amazing because, as I said, it's your journey. You're the only one that gets to make that journey with that individual. So, yeah, there may be other family members involved in the process. There may not. There are other caregivers, the health caregivers, that sort of thing involved in the process. But if you are the primary caregiver for that individual, it's your journey alone, really, because you're the one that experiences all the highs, all the lows, all the panic situations, all the health crisis. You're the one that's there for all of that. And you're also the one that's there for those days that are so beautiful. Those days that my mother would sit here on my porch with me and we'd drink a glass of wine and she'd look at the birds and the buzzards that fly out here. She always called them eagles. And she said, "Oh, I wish I could be up there with those birds." And those moments of joy that you get with that person because you're You're so intimately involved with them. Those moments of joy are yours alone, and nobody else is gonna understand all those moments because they weren't there. They weren't there, and they weren't there for that hospital stay that lasted 4 days, and they weren't there for that moment where where she had to be told she couldn't go back to her apartment, she had to give up her cat, and she turns to you and says, "Well, I didn't ask to get this old, it's okay." They weren't there for the moments that are to other people, those horribly embarrassing moments. Side note, little sidebar here, little funny story. We went to Target one day. My mother loved to shop. And so she gets in with those little electric carts, and I said, let's test it out. Make sure you know how to drive it. And I'm like walking behind her going, look out, look out. She turns down an aisle and she takes out the whole bra wall. The whole wall comes down. And, and she turned around and she says, oh, well, they'll clean it up. So nobody else was there for that but me. No, we laughed hysterically about it. No one else is there for those moments with that individual when you're caring for them but you, and that makes it an amazing journey. And when you get to the very end of that journey and you know they're dying and you see it coming, you're the one that's there to talk to them. You're the one that's there to hold their hand. You're the one. My mother reached out to me at one point. My brothers had come to visit and they were leaving. And she reached out to me and grabbed me and pulled me over, and she could remember, her words were not coming out very well, and she leaned into my ear and she said, "Thank you." Those were her last words to me. That's my amazing journey, and I think for any caregiver, it's hard. It really sucks some days. I hope that's okay to use that word. You get angry, you get resentful, you get upset with your siblings. But it is an amazing journey. It is so incredible, and I am so grateful I got to do that. I regret none of it, because I can't even begin to describe to someone the beauty of being on that journey with my mother to the end of her life, and it was mine. It's my journey alone and with her. That's why it's amazing.
Well, you've convinced me that it was amazing and it was unique and it was personal. And you've created something beautiful from this whole experience where you've have that thread, that common thread taking your capacity for teaching and coaching and love and empathy and then the depth of experience to help others who are going through this caregiving process on their own adventure, their own journey, um, which is an emotional, physical struggle as well. And you have resources available to them. And people can find that at mypivotalpoint.com. So you can find Robin there, mypivotalpoint.com, and there's resources available to you. So I encourage you, if you need it, reach out. You've got some help. And Robin, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you. And I'm grateful. What's beautiful to me is when I see somebody find the gratitude through something that is difficult, painful, challenging, and you find the joy and adventure and gratitude through all of it in what you've become. And you demonstrate that. You're a perfect example of that to me. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. I'm grateful to have met you and grateful for this wonderful conversation and the one we had previously. And thank you for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We will see you next time. Take care.